Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deb Delaney, and I'm a staff member of the South Dakota Humanities Council. We produce the annual Festival of Books, and we're headquartered in Brookings, South Dakota. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the SDHC. We're very pleased that you've joined us for our virtual 2021 event. We'd like to acknowledge first and foremost that this program comes to you from ground, which is the homeland of the Ochady Shakoween, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. The South Dakota Humanities Council honors and appreciates the Indigenous people who have the longest relationship to this place. Before the event gets underway, I'd like to share some housekeeping details. We ask that you keep your microphone muted throughout the event to minimize background noise. If you'd like to ask questions or share comments with today's presenters, please type them in the chat section on Zoom, which you can open by clicking on the conversation bubble at the bottom of your screen. I will pass along any that get missed, but the presenters today are going to keep an eye on that box, and they're going to answer your questions and respond to your comments as they feel led. We encourage you to buy books by our presenting authors at your local independent bookstore. Our official festival booksellers are Books A Million and the Birdcage Bookstore and Mercantile, both in Rapid City. You can also buy directly from authors and publishers. Look for links, which I'll be placing in the chat. To help us continue to improve the festival, we'd appreciate your filling out the evaluation form. I'll share a link in the chat section on Zoom, and we'll also email you that link to the survey at the conclusion of the festival. Finally, you can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. Just visit our website, sdhumanities.org, and click the donate button. The festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who've already donated and are acknowledged on the back of the festival guide and on our website. And now on with the show. This program is titled, What Writers Can Learn from Cops and Criminals. Marc Cameron is the author of the New York Times best-selling Jericho Quinn thrillers, the Deputy U.S. Marshal Arliss Cutter crime series, and since 2016, the continued Tom Clancy Jack Ryan campus thriller series. A retired Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal, Cameron holds a second-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu and is a law enforcement scuba diver and man-tracking instructor. He hails from Texas and now lives with his wife in Alaska. Jim Reese is Associate Professor of English and Director of the Great Plains Writers Tour at Mount Marty University in Yankton, South Dakota. His poetry and prose have been widely published, and he has performed readings at venues from the Library of Congress and San Quentin Prison. Reese's awards include a first place Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award, a Distinguished Achievement Award from Mount Marty University, and a Distinguished Public Service Award in recognition of his exemplary dedication and contributions to the Education Department at Federal Prison Camp in Yankton. His first book of nonfiction, Bone Chalk, was published in December of 2019, and his fourth poetry collection, Dancing Room Only, is coming later this year. Take it away, gentlemen.
Well, thanks for having us on. Jim and I have chatted just a little bit by email, but we're going to get to know each other in front of everybody here and talk about our various experiences. I think mine in law enforcement and his is I told him in my first email, our first email correspondence, that I always get there's a little bit of a yikes factor when somebody that's got his amount of letters and expertise behind their names reads one of my books, because they're definitely not literary fiction. They're fun adventure novels and that kind of thing. So yikes, but it's great to chat with you.
And that's good, because I don't like to read a lot of scholarly work myself, but I do. And speaking of that, I want to say something real quick. I'm going to just jump in because I want to read this. And this is why I like working with police and working at the prisons, because it's just hands-on right away, right? So I went out, and when I found out we were doing this, I bought one of Marc's books right away. And this is why this presentation I think is so interesting to people. I just want to read you like a paragraph from his book.
Thanks.
And it's because of the details, right? And the specifics. Marc knows this stuff, just like I can probably tell you more than you need to know about voice-driven poetry. But he knows, or what I know about prisons, but he knows this stuff, and he's been working in the field for so long, and that's what I think is so interesting. So this isn't anything that there's no conflict or anything happening, right? These are just people walking into a building, this passage. It says, it was nearly 1 PM by the time Cutter swiped his proximity card and drove into the underground garage of the James M. Fitzgerald U.S. Courthouse and Federal Building in downtown Anchorage. He took the time to back his little Ford into his assigned spot near the prisoner garage, a habit that allowed for a quick egress. His hands were full of paperwork and the black ballistic nylon war bag where he kept his vest and other tactical gear when he wasn't actually wearing it. Lola was also laden down with gear from the raid. Thankfully, the court security officers in the control room noticed their approach on the garage cameras and buzzed open the door without either of them having to put down anything. The prisoner elevator was waiting with doors open by the time he and Lola made it through the steel door from the garage and into the man trap. It took them up a level to the outer corridors of the cell block and the back alley of the U.S. Marshal's offices. That's just one paragraph, but an important paragraph to me as a reader. And I think that you need, because just going into a building, you just don't walk in to a prison or a police office or anything like that. There's a lot of little things, and Marc knows that, and he's not forgetting to put all that stuff in there. I think a lot of amateur crime writers they're not gonna know those kinds of details, and that's one little example in the book so far that I've read through. It has got a lot of that, and I really appreciate that. It's kind of like telling somebody how to clean a fish and they've never gone fishing before. If you can't do it right, people are going to put the book down. And that's why what I like about Marc's work and just talking to him so far.
I appreciate that, Jim. And you mentioned earlier as we were logging on, and I think in our emails, that you've done a lot of ride-alongs, and I belong to a couple of help groups and writers online forums where they ask professionals questions, and it's really difficult to tell somebody the basics if they don't know that minutia. I always talk about, when I'm doing research, the unknown unknowns. I go to Argentina, say, with a list of questions, but then when I get to Argentina, I find out a bunch of stuff I didn't even know to ask until I got there. And I think it's that way. And you probably, I assume, got a lot of those when you were on your ride-alongs. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's where I said it went from a chapter in a book to, which will still be a chapter in the manuscript I'm working on now, but it'll be its whole book too. I got so excited. You talked about your son, why he became an officer, or we were talking about that. You said your son is too, right? Up in Anchorage. And I got so invested in doing this, and it was for entertainment and it was for research. And then all of a sudden, oh, hey, there's a reserve officer program in town. We would like you to be part of it. And I went and took the personality test. I had the interviews. I came really close to becoming a reserve officer. And I remember calling my dad and saying, hey, this might sound a little odd, but you might get some phone calls from some people asking if I'd be qualified to be a police officer here in the city. And he said, all right, well, don't get shot because your mom will kill you. And that was, but then at the end, I really said, and then COVID hit too. So that kind of put the brakes on, but I don't think the public wants me carrying a gun. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable carrying a gun. So I've shot him enough times, and I know how my personality is. And that's what I love about when I'm doing those ride-alongs. There's been many times where I've just walked away and said, I just can't I want to just scream at people, and I would lose control. There is just no doubt about it, because there's just too much pressure. And I mean, looking at it honestly, there's just no way. And the amount of control and patience that I've seen doing that is really, really, not, I want to say honorable, but it's really something. You know, I went into that doing that, and I'll say this and I'll be quiet because you know all this stuff, but I went in and I was really, it kind of reminded me the first time I went to San Quentin. I said some stuff I should have never said, but I went in with all these cops. I said, I was waiting for you guys to screw up for the first 6 months I was watching you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they just were nice and smiled. And then after that, I'm like, boy, that's a really stupid thing to say, Jim, you know? And, but they've never said, oh, okay, whatever. You know, there was one guy who's like, I hope you're going to write something good about us. I'm like, well, maybe not about you, but everybody else was really polite and just did their job. And they let me go everywhere, you know, whether it be standing over a victim in an emergency room to other things, you know, to a point, you know, unless my life was in danger or something. And then I had to stay in the car. But even then, you know, after things were secure, they would let me come in and watch how they would investigate and stuff. So it's a very, and I think you can do that anywhere. So if there's writers out there that want to do that, you know, they're very, I think most cities will let you go with them, and they want that public interaction to build community, not only so the community knows more. And I learned so much, and that's what I'm really interested in as an investigative, you know, writer, to really report the truth. And that's what I like, what I'm seeing in your work. And I can't imagine the Clancy estate or whoever controls that would have you doing that stuff, or even would have asked you if they didn't notice that too right away.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that the thing you're doing with a ride along, like I said, I encourage people to go do that. There's citizen police academies. I know Anchorage has a citizen police academy, not to be a reserve officer, but just to get to know your police better. And you get to do a lot of the stuff, the ride alongs, and then they utilize those graduates of the Citizens Police Academy as role players during SWAT training and officer survival training and things like that, because they understand. But doing the ride along like you've done, I would guess that you probably got that. It's like being a passenger in a car versus the driver in a car. If you're taking notes and looking around, and you probably get a lot wider field of view than the officer who's having to focus primarily on the violator, complainant, suspect, whatever. But you know, really and truly, somebody that's doing, excuse me, doing research can watch a ton of videos on, you know, YouTube. There's all kinds of good and bad videos about police officers, but that's always that heightened, you know, that right at the moment of drama. I mean, on cops and stuff like that, it's always the drama. But to me, what makes that drama work is knowing what makes that officer, him or her, tick, what the background, you know, that's what made, in my opinion, Bosch such a cool show, is because Michael Connelly worked with LAPD officers and saw the background that those guys go through. And, you know, as a crime reporter for so long, that he really understood the people and the personality that went behind, because we have far too much, and not to get into a political discussion, but we have far too much us and them in this country. And, you know, we are they, we're all, the police officers have kids and spouses, and, you know, they're in schools, and they're just people trying to do a job like doctors and electric linemen and whatever. But to get to know that little bit of different lens that they have to look at the world with to survive, that's what I think makes it richer writing, when you can look at that like you've done.
Yeah, it's amazing when you go into any kind of situation like that. I like when you said you come in with some questions, and then there's just a whole host of other things that come at you. And I can notice that after the first 6 months, or maybe, you know, I ended up, you know, I suppose it's probably been about 200 or 250 hours of just the ride along. But then I took the Citizens Academy too. And you look at that, and then all the work I've done in prisons, and it's a lot of research, you know. And then I said, okay, I've got all these puzzle pieces, and you just start putting them together, and they're more, So yeah, I mean, it's just neat to really tell the truth and see that stuff, and then, inevitably then if there's a crash or an accident or, the EMTs are there, then you see them come in and just everything you keep learning by just listening and watching and then also trying to help out.
You kind of absorb the culture. And
Yeah.
Joseph Wambaugh is a good example. He worked it, he lived the life, but even though he lived the life, he still went he'd like pay for liquor and pizza for his LAPD buddies and get them all out to his beach house and do research. After he was a New York Times bestselling novelist and a veteran police officer, he still had to keep that, the zeitgeist, the culture is the same, but it also changes, and the jargon changes, and sometimes that jargon is driven by the media and film, and officers are people and they watch film and they pick up things from the East Coast on the West Coast and things like that. So um, yeah, it gives you a chance to absorb that culture. And I would say right off the bat here, I had some of the best advice ever as a writer and a police officer when I was a very young detective from a Texas Ranger. And a lot of people don't know what Texas Rangers do. They just see them on movies. And what the biggest job of a Texas Ranger is to help small departments with major crimes. So I was a detective in a small department, worked my first homicide case when I was like 26 years old, had been to one training, nothing to do with homicides, but assaults and major case sort things. And young lady, I happened to draw the case because I worked a missing persons case. And so they found the body out in the county when I was at church. All the brass was gone. It was a small, like 48 person department total. And so I was out there and since it happened in the city, but the body was dumped in the county was like, this is yours. And so this 26-year-old, sadly, kind of know nothing detective was the one in charge. And I was, you can see I pulled my hair all out probably because of that. But I took all the measurements. This is back in the days of 35 millimeter. And I think I burned up 15 rolls of film and, trying to figure out what was going on to do justice to this poor college girl. And Texas Rangers rolled up, and she had been there for several days in the Texas heat. And this Ranger got out of his car. He always wore a big, Resistol summertime, so straw hat, and he always had a flat toothpick in his mouth. And he walked up to the scene, the body scene, and the wind was blowing slightly away. But you know how you've done enough ride-alongs, you know what a body smells like. And so we kind of hunkered down next to the body, and there was a lot of larvae and stuff on it. And I said, Billy, tell me what I need to do here. Walk me through what I need to do. And he took out his little notebook and he took his toothpick out of his mouth and he said, Marcus, write down everything you see. And right while he was talking, a fly, one of those larvae, hatched into a fly and flew right into his mouth, right off the body. And he didn't even flinch. He said, Marcus, write down everything you see and watch out for the blowflies. And I just internalized that through my whole career. And I really looked for blowfly kind of experiences and wrote down everything from the time I was I wanted to write back then. I was already submitting short stories, but even as not doing ride-alongs, but in the job, I would keep a journal. And I have, I don't know, 40 small notebooks in my office right now. My kids call them the books of all books because it's got all my music. It's not really a diary, but it's the stuff that made up my life in law enforcement, and I refer to it all the time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think there's just I think why, it's kind of, I'm trying, there's just so many different things. I should look at my notes here because otherwise I'm going to start rambling, but that's a great
Somebody
example.
asked a question about
Yeah.
Citizens Police Academy. You'd probably be the one to answer that because you
Oh, I
went through
don't,
one.
we just have it. I think they have them pretty much everywhere, don't they, Mark? I mean, it's just a train. I think ours here was 3 or 4 months, and you went once a week for a few hours, and it could be anything from learning about, and we don't call it the SWAT team here, I should remember, it's called something else, but anything of watching the SWAT team, they show you how it operates, to different aspects of policing. They try to teach you everything. We did I think some of the things that I liked the most was like a mock scenario, when would you use your firearm in this situation, and you really enacted it and had they presented you went in the basement and they presented you with a situation, and you had what would you do?
Shoot,
Yeah.
don't shoot. Yeah.
Shoot or not shoot, and then what did you notice later? And which I thought I was pretty observant, and I missed something right that was pretty close to me, but I was so focused on the interaction, which got more and more heated, and then what would you do? And I think that's what I really like so much about, and still like about doing that, just watching and, like you said, taking notes and stuff. Because when we went into San Quentin the first weekend, and we would go there, and San Quentin's about 432 acres. It's, with the staff and everybody working there, it's about 5,000 people, 5,500 at that time. I'm assuming it's a little less now, probably closer to 5,000 or a little under maybe. But and I walked in and it's very old when you go through the entrance, very old iron Sally port, and you finally get in. And every time I've gone into a prison too, I mean, there's the stuff in the back of your head going, well, this wouldn't be that hard to bring something in here. That's what I'm thinking. Like every time, and there is the same thing. I was like, well, okay. But we had also all gone through these various background checks, federal and state. And anyway, you get in there, and I went right into, and it's outside too. San Quentin's a bizarre place. Have you been there?
I've never been to San Quentin.
But it's outdoors and it's indoors. So we got to our arts room, and right away I went up to, it was called the Arts and Corrections. And so each hour there would be something, or every hour and a half, there'd be some new kind of programming, and we would spend our days in there. And I remember walking right up to a guy right away, and I said, the first thing I said, so when are you getting out of here? And he just looked at me, and he got up in my face, and there's no security in there. Once you were in there, they would come check every half hour. They'd do rounds. He said, son, how old are you? I was like, 34. He said, I've been in here since you were 4 years old. I'm never getting out. He goes, you got another question? And so I kind of started, by the end of that weekend and it took me a couple of years to kind of lose the ego of telling people, hey, I get to go to all these prisons and stuff. And I thought it was just a cool thing as a writer. And then to really understand our criminal justice system, what my role was, how 95% of these men and women are getting out. And so you learn all this stuff later, like, okay, what am I really doing here? And if you're doing it long enough, and you obviously take your work home, as you know, and which I know the feeling I got from just doing ride-alongs with police, and it was just like, or in the prisons, it's like I'm thinking about, I think because I just care, I mean, if you didn't care, then maybe it's no big deal. But I mean, I've had depression before in my life, and I remember coming home from doing ride-alongs, and then it was also the time change. I was doing it overnight, so I'm with them all night long, but I'd be like, wow, I'm not even doing their job. I don't have to fill out reports, or I don't have to follow up or do any of that stuff, but just what I would see, and then how do you process that and deal with it? And it was a lot of domestic abuse or neglect, or there's all kinds of different things, but those were the ones that it was like, and the public sees the police, right? So once the police have done what they need to do, then they're done with it. But what the public doesn't know is what goes on behind the scenes, and how so many cases are dismissed or plead down or something like that. So you've got people stabbing each other, and you're like, wait a second, how come this? I just saw this guy and he stabbed his brother. It's like, oh yeah, well, case dismissed. It's like, what? It's like you can't, or what really is disheartening is, you're trying to help in a domestic abuse situation, and then the victim is so scared to say anything, and then knowing full well that this guy is going to get out in 24 hours, And that needs to be addressed, I think, everywhere, and so they know they can be safe. And there's programs as well here in our small city, but
Yeah, and it's
that was
changed.
interesting.
It's changed over the years. When I first started in law enforcement, the victim had to be the complainant, and so if the spouse preferred not to press charges because of fear or just fear of being alone, losing their their breadwinner of the family,
Yeah.
then they would often not press charges, more often than not. But thankfully, laws have changed. Now the state becomes the plaintiff. So the 99.9% of the time, the primary aggressor in a domestic goes to jail, at least that night. Like you said, oftentimes cases are dropped, but that's part of the quote unquote drama, if you will, that plays out after that. One of the interesting things that I think you've been able to do with your ride-alongs in the prison is you see that bridge in between the on the street law enforcement. That was one of the real positive things about, as a rider, being in the Marshal Service, because we have that custodial responsibility as well. So we don't keep people in a Marshal Service lockup, but we pay the lockups to hold federal prisoners, and then oftentimes are the ones that, what we say, hook and haul. We hook and haul the prisoners. When you're a new deputy, you do a lot of hooking and hauling. You're going in and hooking them up in belly chain, handcuffs, and leg irons. We call that a 3-piece suit. So you put somebody in a 3-piece suit to move them, sometimes by sedan, sometimes by van, sometimes by airplane, bus and airplane. Generally, the big districts have some buses. I was never in that big a district, but we do have what everybody calls Con Air, the Justice Prisoner Alien Transportation airplanes that the Marshal Service and ICE runs. But you get to see that, the agents, federal agents, will arrest so and so. They take them to initial appearance. Then the marshals, they're remanded to the custody of the marshals. Then if they get out on bond and they run, then the marshals, that's when they become a fugitive. But once we get them, we'll see them in court. If they're in custody, we get to, in our cell block during the day, we're listening to their conversations when we're going back and forth with them to court, if they're violent prisoners and we have to be there in court with them. So we get to see a different side than the officer who arrests them at point of crime, or point of warrant service or whatever. And so you really get to know some of these people as individuals. And I think that's what makes, people, and I'm sure you've seen this in your experience too. People always ask me, boy, you must meet a lot of evil people. No, over the course of 30 years, I could probably count the evil, and that's a judgment call, but what I would call evil people on both hands and maybe one foot. Met a lot of people that have done evil things in the spur of the moment, the heat of passion or whatever, very evil things, but very few people that are soul-eating evil people. And our prisons are just not filled up with that kind of people. They are there, make no mistake, but by and large, we're just talking about people that have made bad, sometimes extremely bad decisions.
I remember one of the guys, the CEOs on death row at San Quentin, said the same thing. Look, these guys have made some horrible decisions, same kind of thing. He goes, but there's just a few of them that he thought that were just sociopaths, evil, and that's one thing I'm exploring in this new manuscript too, because that's what so many people think, too, because of what media feeds them, right? What you're seeing on so many of these shows. So find the good true crime shows if you can, because that's really where the truth is. And especially when it comes, and really looking at the criminal justice system, when it comes to what we could be doing a lot better after, everybody wants to be protected. Everybody wants to be able to call upon somebody when they need to, call the police, the U.S. Marshal, whoever it is, to come. And, they're still, we want to believe they're out there, and they are. But then what do you do with people who've made some really bad mistakes, and what we're doing? If you look on the war on drugs, or is that a war on drugs? Is that a war on race? Is that a war on poverty? And is it all of that? And has it worked? And we're spending millions of dollars for people that really, in the federal system, at least about 50% of them have addiction issues.
Mhm.
By putting somebody in a box, for so long, it's not going to help them with that. So we've got to reevaluate that. I think for nonviolent offenders, we could be doing so much more. And that's stuff I talk about too, just because, look, I remember the first supervisor of education that I reported to at the prison, once I asked her all, questions like, are there evil people here, stuff like that. And she said, look, all you have to remember is any of us could have wound up here after a few bad decisions.
Mhm.
And she was right. And, we're all guilty of crime. Just a lot of us haven't been caught.
Yep. No, absolutely. But that's something that writers and politicians and we as citizens who elect our politicians have to figure out. Even though I say that about the evil people, a police officer on the street, I'm thinking of my son, kind of on the street kind of police officer, doesn't have, and that's what police academy, citizens police academies, ride-alongs teach you, is that luxury is not there. The luxury is not there for that police officer on the street when that man or woman is making a bad decision, doing something atrocious, awful, deadly even. You can't muddy the water by thinking about what should happen. That's something for somebody else. And that's one of the things that sort of it makes for the inner workings of a police officer's mind, a law enforcement officer's mind, when you're writing about them, I think, is to realize that, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and police officers out there on the street know that. But and again, I don't want to get into a big political discussion, but when we talk about, you know, transferring money over to help, with addiction and all that, that's great, as long as the police officers get some of that taken off their plate, but they don't.
Yeah.
They still have to do the same handling, the same problems in these 20. I worked as part of the Marshal Service duties. We work along with the Alaska State Troopers. One of our Marshal Service is relatively new jobs within the last, I'd say 12, 13 years. Whenever the Adam Walsh Act came out, we were assigned tracking down unregistered sex offenders. That took us all over the state in places in roadless areas in Alaska and other states too. I'm just familiar with Alaska, where we weren't generally going before. And so the captain of, excuse me, the captain of the entire western side of the state, called C Detachment, which is kind of their frontier detachment. It's basically the size of Oregon. It's in between the two great rivers in Alaska, the Kuskokwim and the Yukon, and it's this giant delta, and it's handled by about 20 troopers, and it's about the size of Oregon. All the villages are accessible only by boat and aircraft, and so we provided a boat. The troopers have their boats out there. We would go out and we would assist them. They would assist us. And I remember I was the chief deputy at the time, and I went and did some ride-alongs to see what they were dealing with out there as we were sending our deputies out, deputy marshals out. And I remember landing at this village with this 24-year-old trooper, just good-hearted soul, just wanted to do the right thing. He was out there in the middle of bush Alaska, go-getter kind of a trooper, wanting to serve and protect. And when we landed, 6 women lined up to report sexual assault in a village of 350 people. And it was, you could just see, I watched as this young trooper over the course of a couple of months of going out there just became kind of beaten, just seeing that trauma. He was a sin eater, if you will, just sort of absorbing the trauma that he was around all the time. And he came out of it. They have assistants and things like that, and you know, help them psychologically and that sort of thing. But it's hard to understand that unless you've observed it. So
Yeah, it's hard. I know exactly, because I asked right away. I'm like, we would show up someplace and you could tell somebody had some obvious mental health issues, and you're not trained to deal with that. And all the schooling I've had, I'm like, well, wait a second, they don't know, you know. I mean, we should be able to, at that moment, if you can contain a situation, then yeah, be able to call somebody. And I think that was part of the idea, or is part of the idea. Some of the people taking the Citizens Academy that they would like to see here, because it's, you know, okay, this is an extension of, you know, once we can identify this, then what can happen next? Because yeah, you're not trained to do that, and then it shouldn't be your job to do that either, or to be a counselor or
you don't have
anything, you know.
time. You know, one of the
No.
reasons I became a police officer, wanted to become a police officer, was watching Adam 12 as a kid. And Adam 12, much of that, it's a pretty realistic show. Much of that was them being counselors, talking people off the wall, so to speak, just you know, being being teachers and surrogate parents and, you know, that sort of thing. So that interested me. It is definitely a people business. Almost every day when my son is driving home from work, he'll call me, and he starts almost every conversation with, "Dad, people." And sometimes it's, "Oh, I'm amazed at how resilient people are," but most of the time it's, "You're not going to believe what I saw today." Just people in general. So you learn a lot about, um, and in a custodial situation, you do as well, right? I mean, you're
Do you
inside.
have you been tempted to write just straight nonfiction about some stuff, as you know, without, you know, changing names if you need to? I don't even know why you would need to name anybody, but just about what you're talking about. I think that's interesting. I might
No,
even
but
interview you about some stuff for my book,
sure, no,
because
sure, but
it's, you know, I mean, you're able to put it in to the fiction, what I'm seeing right away, no problem, you know, the truth. But it's interesting just the, you know, if you could figure out what it is you wanted to say, you know, because I think it's what I like. There's a book called A Thousand Naked Strangers by
mm,
a guy named Kevin Hazard. It came out a few years ago, and he was an EMT, and it just goes into a scene, you know, goes into a call
mhm,
and what happens. And he has just a bunch of those in the
mhm.
book. And so as a reader, you just learn, okay, this is how they dealt with it. And it's pretty interesting. And, you know, I could sit and listen to you tell stories
Well,
for
I
years,
appreciate
I'm
that.
sure.
That's great. I like that, and I love telling the stories. I think in what I would like to think that my fiction is compressed truth.
Yeah.
It's you know, if I always joke that if I wrote about a true story about a deputy marshal, he'd be trying not to fall asleep in court with drool on his tie, you know. There's so much. We don't do a lot of report writing in the marshal service, where the FBI and
Yeah.
other agencies have to do a lot of. In fact, my son gauges, when he's on a special unit now, but when he was on patrol, he gauged his night and how enjoyable it was by how few reports he had to take. I mean, I remember that from patrol. Oh man, I had 6 reports. Can you believe it? I got out with only 2 reports. But the downside of being a deputy marshal is court. You have to spend your time, especially as a newer deputy, sitting in court. And I think that we could probably all represent ourselves as attorneys by the time we're in for 5 or 6 years, because you hear what's going on and observe. And I took a lot of notes there as well. But I try, I hope that the stuff that I'm writing in the fiction, I hope people see that as
Oh, yeah.
truth. Because I mean, the fight, even the next book after the one you're reading, Open Carry, the book Stone Cross, there's a couple of altercations that Cutter has that are pretty much blow for blow stuff that I've been through, and able to, you know, make Cutter look cooler than I did in real life. I think I probably looked like a goofball, but so for one thing, I make my living as a writer, and I think that consumer
Yeah.
fiction just, I don't know that anybody would want to read not enough people would want to read a nonfiction, you know.
Yeah,
So
it's
I don't
true.
know. That's kind of a sad reality. I wish they did.
Oh, it's true. What's in that? This question says, Mark, can you share an experience or two that you've had in Alaska that you wouldn't likely face outside of Alaska?
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me really early on, um, I was I was tasked. I've been an outdoorsman my entire life, and learned a bit about tracking. But we had a professional tracker, train and tracking instructor as part of the district, and so of Alaska when I moved up here in '98, and he got the chief to agree to let him put together a tactical tracking unit, which is like a SWAT team, but deals with rural issues and actual man tracking, boots on the ground tracking. So we got to do quite a bit of that up here. And there's nothing more exhilarating than tracking a bad guy in the Alaska bush. A lot of times we were flown in to places. If you go to my Facebook author page and look far enough back, you'll see some of the pictures, flown in by the National Guard or whatever, and dropped off. There's nothing more exhilarating than to see your bad guy's track and then a bear track over top of it with water flowing into the track. You realize that, the timing there as a tracker, you realize, okay, bad guy went first, then the bear came through, and not that long ago, because it's just now filling up with water. So you deal with the fauna up here that other places in the lower 48, you have bears, but not necessarily interacting with people the way they. I mean, we had a bear in our driveway just a few weeks ago. A friend of mine had one on his deck just 2 nights ago, and we've already got snow on the ground, so they should be denning up. So we have to deal with that. Right after I first moved here, we were on a warrant, and we had the Anchorage PD SWAT team with us, and I was the guy was in the house. We knew he was in the house, and I was up against the wall by basically beside a back bedroom window, and the privacy fence was maybe, I don't know, 10 feet away in front of me. And we had a SWAT guy on the other side watching the window kind of obliquely from me, so we weren't in a crossfire. And I heard the SWAT guy, I was focused on my window, and other people were banging on the door. And I heard the SWAT guy go like that. And I looked up, and here came a mama moose with a baby trotting in between the house and the fence. I could have reached out and touched her, but I'm way more nervous about moose than I am about bears when we're out doing stuff like that, because they're pretty dangerous. So that sort of thing, the weather, the daylight, in the summer, there's no place to hide as a bad guy or as a good guy. When you're doing surveillance, the night is your friend. But so weather and fauna, I guess, and just being so far away. Oftentimes, when you go out to some of these bush villages and areas where people were looking for different people, there is no backup there. The troopers have a kind of a, there's the old story of one riot, one ranger. Well, the troopers have that same kind of mentality. Oftentimes, they're their only backup, and it takes a long time to we had a big fugitive. I'll tell one more little quick vignette and then I'll quit. But we had a big fugitive roundup in that western part of Alaska I was talking about. It was in the wintertime. We had snow machines and aircraft and what you would call a snowmobile down in the lower 48. But we had, I think, about 30 snow machines that we went out to different villages on. And we dropped out, and we had some deputies come up from the lower 48. We had a young deputy, and I can't remember what state, Oregon or Washington, someplace where there was woods. So he was kind of familiar, but he got dropped off ahead of the trooper that he was supposed to be working with out in a village way out on the Bering Sea, the Chukchi Sea, kind of up north. And they dropped him off, and so this was a coastal village, but it had already snowed. There's ice pack already frozen. So there's ice pack, and big storm was moving in. And right before he got there was a double murder suicide in this house, no other law enforcement in the village of about 800 people. And he called me on the phone and he said, Chief, what do I do? There's nobody else here, and there's a double murder suicide, and there's a storm, and the plane's not even able to take off. Nobody can come in. The troopers aren't going to be here for maybe 2 days. And I said, well, just turn the turn the heat off in the house and preserve the crime scene, and eat your MREs and hang out. So it's definitely a different kind of a place. But to me, that made it a super exciting place.
Yeah. We're gonna run out of time. We need to do this next year for sure, or the year after, when you can come down and keep going, because if we keep telling stories, we could do this all day.
I know. Sorry.
But those are the details.
Here too. Let's see, Jim, what's the most surprising thing you've learned while interviewing an inmate?
I'm trying to think. Let me end with this. This is like something that's in the book Bone Chalk. In the book Bone Chalk, I have an essay called what is it called? Never Talk to Strangers. 12 years in prisons and what criminals teach me. And that's really the book I'm working on now, is an extension of this. I'm walking the track. I'm able to walk the track at the prison with these guys on certain occasions. And this is one of the inmates talking to me. Most guards don't know what you're in for. They don't care. We're loaded on a 747 one winter, and we're standing on the tarmac without any jackets, a bunch of us. Just a t-shirt, orange pants, no socks, no shoes. They had our legs chained at the ankles so tight. I was bleeding all over, freezing. Scars are still here. He stops and puts his leg on a bench and pulls down his sock to show me. See these flowers? He says, they're closed at night, and in the morning they open. They stay like that most of the day. I don't know what they're called. I had the same ones by my front steps. The stems feel plastic, almost fake. They break easily. We're not supposed to touch them here. I'm no killer. I'm no sicko. My whole stint that got me here lasted only 5 months. Meth will eat you up. 15 years I'll be down for an addiction I couldn't shake. Could have never imagined. When my daughter used to come visit me, I'd be behind those glass partitions. She'd tell me, Daddy, roll down this window. I'd say I can't. She'd ask, when are you coming home? Soon, I'd tell her. Now she wants to know the date. She'll be graduated by then. That hit home just because I've got 2 daughters, and just, but those kinds of stories, there's just so many of them, and you learn. And at the federal prison, I'm working with guys that either are working on a GED, or some of them have their PhD that are in my classes, and they're in there. So I put a link on here to 4 p.m. Count. That's a journal we publish at the prison, and it's free. We don't sell them. So if anybody's interested in that, they can see what these guys are working on and stuff. And my goal at the prison is just to help guys come to terms with the emotional instabilities that brought them to prison. And they can do that through writing. So
that's great. That's a great service. That's incredible.
Yeah, let's definitely try to do this again soon, next year.
Yeah,
I know Deb is looking at us like, I know we're out of time, so I'll be quiet.
This is really fascinating. I wish we'd had more time to get into more of the stories, which of course are the real meat of what the audience loves to hear, and how you write about those things. Just real quick, both of you can just wrap up something you want to say. Lastly, I don't see any more questions, so you can just take a minute or two, each of you, and give us some final thoughts if you have them.
Well, I'll start then. It made me think of you, Deb. When my son went out on patrol for the very first time without a training officer, so I felt kind of guilty. He's our baby. Felt kind of guilty that he got into law enforcement anyway. Nervous. I mean, my oldest son was already in law enforcement at the time, but I was very nervous as our youngest. And I guess you feel differently about that. And he went through training. He did a good job. He went through FTO, field training officer. And then the night that he was going to be by himself, I was a nervous wreck. I was just crazy nervous. My wife was fine. And I finally, it kind of bugged me. And I said, Vicky, what's the matter with you? Why, how could you be this way? And she said, Mark, I've been feeling this way for 30 years. This is new to you. You're going to have to get used to it. So I feel for people in that law enforcement family.
Yeah, and I think every, any kind of field like that, when you're working in criminal justice and different jobs, whatever it is, whether you're in healthcare, I mean, we see it too, there's a lot of things that you take home with you and how you can process it and deal with it and things like that. So, but at the end of the day, I think through whether we're writing fiction or nonfiction, writing about police or prisoners, I think at the end of the day, I still want to believe people wake up and want to do the right thing. And I hope too, and I talk to my students about this, I hope everybody is trying to be chipping away at the iceberg to do what they can to help. I believe that people want to do that. I have to believe that. And that's something, whatever I'm writing, that I just feel, so that's never going to go away. So I hope by us talking about this stuff that's there too. And comes through, the truth comes through, in fact, and in the facts, that fiction and nonfiction. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Makes perfect sense. Thanks for what you do, Jim.
Thank you for what you're doing. And then let's just stay in touch and we'll talk soon for sure.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Deb, for having us on.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for
Okay.
coming.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you. On behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, we want to thank both of our presenters, Marc Cameron and Jim Reese, for sharing their expertise and their stories with us. Thanks to all of you in the Zoom audience for attending this event. Don't forget to visit our website, sdbookfestival.com/virtual, for more great programming to come through the virtual 2021 South Dakota Festival of Books. All of you enjoy the rest of your day. It was great meeting you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
in touch.
See you soon.
All right.
Talk to you soon, Mark.
All right. Take care.
All right, take care.